You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we focus on financial strategies for building a profitable food business. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan. On today's episode, I am joined by Alli Ball, a former grocery buyer turned wholesale consultant. Alli is the creator of Retail Ready, an online course designed for producers of packaged products in the food industry. Alli has helped hundreds of emerging brands understand what it takes to get their products on the retail shelf and keep them there. Today, Alli joins me in conversation about how to build a successful business with a high-priced product. We're starting from product concept. We're talking about the importance of knowing your target audience and how you can convey your premium brand value through the various customer touch points of your business. This episode is full of tangible, actionable information for good food businesses of all types. So grab your favorite note-taking device and let's get to it. Alli, I am so excited that you are joining me here today. Welcome to the Good Food CFO podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. I'm so excited for our conversation.
Me too. As I mentioned in the intro, you're a wholesale expert and your course, Retail Ready, is designed for CPG brands. But I want to make it clear to all the listeners out there, this conversation we're having today is going to be so beneficial no matter what type of food business you own. And I know that you've got background working with other types of food businesses as well. Can you fill us in a little bit on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. And I'm really glad that you put that disclaimer in the beginning, because I think it's so easy to listen to an intro or tune into a podcast and be like, oh, no, like that's not for me. And I'll tell you, like, this idea of what should I charge? Can I charge that much? Will my audience pay for it? Why isn't my product selling? All of those questions I see in every single channel in the food industry. So I've worked with restaurants, food trucks, obviously packaged food and beverage brands, caterers, retail stores, food service, all different clients. I kid you not. You know about me, Sarah. Like, I've since narrowed it down to work only with packaged food and beverage. But, in my previous life, all of these clients struggled with the same thing. So I'm really, like I said, I'm happy to have this conversation. And I think it's something that everyone in the food industry needs to hear.
Agreed. And that's why I'm so glad that you said yes to joining me today, because I can't think of a better person to have this conversation with. And, I talk to business owners all of the time about the right price for their products, right? And we do it from a financial standpoint. So what are the costs to produce your product? How much is your packaging? What's the profit margin that you need to achieve to have a profitable business, right? Not just a profitable product. And what happens so often, especially in the good food space, is that the right price is often a bit higher, or maybe a lot higher than what the business owner thinks that they can charge for their product, or believes that they can charge for their product. And, we reach this point in the conversation where business owners have really two decisions, right? You can either modify how you make your product or how you package your product to reduce costs and, sell it at a lower price, or you can make the decision to move forward. And so the very first question I have for you is, like, how do you make that decision? I believe it's, your target audience and, taking into consideration your brand and your brand identity, but I want to hear it straight from you. How do you determine what the right price point is for your product?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I guarantee that every business owner is going to struggle with it at some point, right? I bet, Sarah, like, you're nodding along. I'm sure you see it with 100% of your clients. And I love, Sarah, that you said that business owner can make a decision one of two ways. They can either decide to reduce costs so they can reduce price, or they can move forward with the price that, naturally fell into place and figure out how to sell that product. And let's touch on that first idea before we really go down into this episode. But this idea that you might decide to reduce your costs and reduce the end price of your product. And typically, like you said, that is through reducing ingredient costs. Maybe you change up your packaging, maybe you change up your production methods. But usually, Sarah, I see brands have to compromise on their values when they do this, right? And I think that this is where it gets tricky. And this is where a brand has to have done the work up front about who am I as a brand? What are my values? What do I stand for? What am I going to always do in my business? And what am I going to never do in my business? And that will guide them forward as to which path they go down in the first place. Do they, I don't want to say cut corners, Sarah, because that implies that it's a negative thing, but do they change things about their business to reduce the price, or do they stick to the original plan and move forward with that higher price product?
Yeah.
And does that make sense?
It totally does. And a little bit of foreshadowing here. We've got a bonus video on YouTube that talks about how to consider or go about modifying the ingredients in your product or sourcing differently without compromising your values. So I'm so glad that you brought that up because yes, that's the major concern. If I do this, am I going to be true to my values? Am I going to be true to the values that I want my business to have? And am I delivering the end product that I want to be serving to people? So I'm so glad that you brought that up. It's a big decision for business owners to make, and so absolutely. And there's a lot of considerations too.
Yeah, we just summarized it in like 90 seconds, but obviously there's like so many things to think about there.
Yeah.
And I think there's often somewhere where you meet in the middle too, right? Like it's not a black and white situation either. Like I throw all my values out the window and I start selling my product for $1.99. Yeah.
I think glass jars is a great example of that. I've talked to a couple business owners who are like, we want to do glass jars. We want to, that's important to us and it's sustainable. And it's like, you've determined, and we're going to talk through how to determine that the price point with the glass bottles won't work for your business. So what's something else that is still in line with your values? And if and when you can get to that glass bottle level and it makes sense for your business, then you can get there. So I think this is like a whole nother conversation, but yeah, what makes sense for your business right now that does align with your values, and you can have goals for your business in the future as well. But let's bring it back to option number 2, which is selling your product at this, what I'm going to call a higher price point, right? Which is going to be different whether you sell salad dressing or coffee or, something else. But we're just going to call it higher price point for ease of conversation.
Yeah. And I think that this is the common path, right? People are like, no, I started this food business because I want to share this product with the world. And lo and behold, it's expensive. Yeah. Like, what do I do now? And so I got to tell you, Sarah, like I fully think that there is a product for every different type of audience. And there is an audience for every price point, right? So I'm just gonna period, end of episode. You can sell anything at the price that you need to, as long as you put in the work to find those people, to strategically market to them, and to to really figure out who are those raving fans of your product who are going to be comfortable with the price point that you need to charge.
Yeah. In a separate episode, we talked about, we had a finance expert on talking about all of the emotions that come into play when you need to make money decisions, one of them being the price of your product. So just sort of caveat to anybody listening who's thinking, ooh, I've done that work to determine the right price for my product, and that price scares me or makes me feel any negativity in any sort of way. You can do some emotional work to kind of gain that courage, right? And then the next step is exactly what you're talking about, or maybe you do them simultaneously, to identify who you're selling to and who you are. And I also want to point out too, when you're thinking about what is an okay price for me to sell my product at, it's not really about like, what's the current highest price, on the market with one of my competitors, or right? Like, Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I sometimes see folks saying, well, the highest price product sells for X. And so that's as high as I can go.
Yeah, I see that a lot too. And it makes sense that people think that, right? They're like, the most expensive almond butter on the shelf is $18.99. There is no way that my audience is going to pay $24.99 for my almond butter.
Right.
And so, Sarah, I do think it is important. It is valuable to study your competitors. I think it's fair to say that you've got to create a business and a financial model that works for you.
Yes. Right? I'm over here waving my arms in the air. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. That's yes.
Can I give it a brand example here?
Of course, please.
Okay, cool. So when I think about this idea that like I can't possibly charge more than my competitors, I can't possibly do this, I really think about the coconut cult as the leader of or just the shining example of someone who has done this really well. So for your listeners who aren't familiar with the coconut cult, I'll say it is a probiotic yogurt and gelato line. And so before we got on this episode, Sarah, I looked up the prices because I wanted to make sure that like I was current here. So they sell an 8-ounce yogurt for $19.50, and they sell a pint of gelato for $23. So in my point of view, Alli Ball, like, that's expensive. I don't pay that much for yogurt. I don't pay that much for gelato. It just, in my book, that's expensive. However, they have lines around the block for their product. They have a wait list for their product. They make these like small batch, runs that just sell out in a flash. And it is because they have created a brand, I could say a cult following for the coconut cult and for their products, right? And I think, if that founder years ago had said the most expensive gelato on the shelf is $7.99, like I can't charge the price that I need to stay in business, or I can't charge close to $20 for my 8-ounce yogurt.
Yeah.
Where would they be now? They would be out of business.
Yeah, non-existent. So let's start at the basics, right? So for business owners who are listening, who either have a product that is, again, higher priced, right, in the market that they're in, or if they're a business owner who's getting ready to launch a business or launch a new product, how do we go about identifying our target market or target audience?
I use this phrase all the time. You've probably heard me say it, that everyone is not your target audience.
Yeah.
Right? And here's why. So when we think that we have to appeal to as many people as possible, we lose sight of who is truly head over heels for our brand, right? Whose problems we magically solve, Sarah, like who those people who are willing to pay the price that we need to charge for our products.
Yeah.
Right? So we can even look back at the coconut cult example, and I'm not their target audience, right? I am not eating yogurt and gelato for gut health issues, right? And so, yes, I might think that $19.50 is a ridiculous price to pay for yogurt, but like, I don't have the problem that they're solving for their audience. So frankly, like, who cares that I think it's, out of my price range for yogurt.
Yeah. And I want to say too, if I can, I wrote a note down. You said, what is the problem that the brand is magically solving for their consumer? Sometimes people might think like, oh, I'm not like solving a problem.
Yeah.
Can you provide another way of thinking about it? Like, I've got some ideas in my head, but like, I'll give you the example actually. Like, I'm thinking about caterers, specifically those that are sourcing local, sustainable, right? Everything that they produce is seasonal. They're going to markets, they're visiting farmers, and their products are higher priced. And so they're not, magically solving a problem. Maybe they're not even thinking about solving I guess the problem they solve is that they offer catering for people who really care about the where their food comes from.
Yep.
So then is the idea that number one, you need to identify the problem.
Yes.
Right? That you're solving.
This is literally the first thing that I make students do in Retail Ready.
Okay.
We get super clear on what that problem is that you're solving, and then how can we use that to attract more of the audience who have that problem. But I hear what you're saying, Sarah, right? Like it is hard to it can be hard to identify what the problem is, right? Like say you're a taco truck and you're like, I make really great tacos, but like frankly, I'm not the most sustainable. I'm not sourcing all organic. Like I'm not that convenient. I'm like kind of like on the outskirts of the city. Like what the heck problem am I solving?
Right.
And I would argue that there's always a problem. It doesn't have to be like a drastic problem, but there's always something that you are providing for your audience. So in the taco truck example, it could be you are providing lunch for under $12 to people in that community.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be like a gut health problem or like a, something that's really related to like something that the audience is losing sleep over.
Yeah.
It can just be providing a convenience in their day or something that, really, really makes their day a little bit nicer or easier or better.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. I know so many people get hung up on the word problem. So thank you for allowing me to kind of dive into that a little bit better. So once we've identified the problem that the business is solving, is there a next step in this process?
Yes. And it's related to this idea that going back to this, everyone is not your audience, right? Like we want to figure out who that singular person is who connects with our brand, right? And in Retail Ready, we really talk about it, not so much about the demographics of that person. Like, I don't care that she is a 40-year-old white woman who lives in LA who eats mostly plant-based. Like, that's not what we're doing here. What we're saying is my target audience, this single person, identifies with my brand because of what emotional connection do they have, right? So instead of doing the demographics, we really turn to psychographics here. And it's, truthfully, we do a bit of the demographics, but the underlying thing that we're getting at is why are they so excited about my brand? What is it about my brand in particular that draws them in, that produces an emotion that makes them feel connected, right? And so, Sarah, this is typically where people start saying like, well, that's not true, Alli. Like, so many people love my product.
Right.
Like, I sell at the farmer's market and so many different types of people love my product. Like, moms come and the kids love it. And then this like older gentleman comes every single week and like teenagers love it. Like, have you heard this too?
Yeah.
You're like laughing here because like everyone says it, right? And this is where I'm going to push back and I'm going to say, well, one, if you're using this information like based off the farmer's market, we already have narrowed it down to that's a person who shops at the farmer's market, right? And that's a very particular type of person.
Yep.
And what's the common emotion that they're getting from purchasing your product? So again, when people push back here, I think it's really important to realize that we start as narrow as possible here, Sarah, and then we can expand our audience. So we use this concept of if someone's watching on YouTube, they can see my hands moving here, but this core target audience in the middle, and then we've got a crowd around them, and then a halo around that.
Okay.
So when you are in the first few years of your business, you really want to speak to the core audience in the middle, those people who are so devoted. And then as you grow and as your sales increase, you realize that, yes, that audience does expand a bit. And yes, it gets bigger and bigger and people start buying your product for various reasons. But at the beginning, focusing on that core is so, so important.
And this might be digging a little bit. I think it's digging a bit deeper. And I always like to come to the podcast with this openness for whatever question comes into my head, I ask it out loud. Because I think if it's popping in my mind, someone has to be wondering the same thing, right? So what's in my mind right now is that there's a business owner or an aspiring food business owner who has a product idea. And so I have this product. Let's just go back to like maybe the early days of Coconut Cult, right? And they're like, I make for myself or for my friends this coconut probiotic yogurt, and it's vegan, and right? And you're like, who is going to buy this? Right? Is like is that sort of where you've got to start? Or is there another way to think about it?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different ways you can start. And I'm not going to say there's a good way and a bad way, but there are a few different ways that people start, right? And Sarah, you're right. So often people start with a product, right? Obviously, you maybe are solving an issue that you have in your own life, or you have a family recipe, or like everybody's telling you should sell your like delicious banana bread or whatever it is. And then we can go in two different directions. We can either pay for data and either hire a consultant. There are literally consultants who do this market research for brands to figure out, is there an audience for your product and how big of an audience is there? So you can either go down that route or you can start surveying and testing people and like, trying to connect with that audience on your own. Typically, I think it's ideal if you can do a little bit of both. There are resources for free data out there, Sarah, but at the beginning, we often turn to that qualitative data, that data of who we think is going to buy our product based off our experience, surveying friends and families and kind of like expanding that pool of people who might buy our product. But then as we get into production, as we start selling, as we start surveying the actual people who are purchasing our product, we can then make business decisions based off that quantitative data rather than the like gut feeling of who's going to buy our brand.
Yeah. So there's going to be transitions is what I'm hearing you say.
Oh, yeah.
And I will point out here as well, when you start with a product, another very important step is to determine how many. I remember going through this process with someone who wanted to sell her amazing chocolate chip cookies, and she wanted to do it as a cottage food business to start. And we determined how many cookies she would have to sell to even, to make a living. It's just something comfortable, right? The number of cookies that she would have to make and how long it would take her to do so in her home kitchen would have had her making cookies around the clock.
Yeah.
As the financial consultant in this conversation, I want to say there's those two important things, right? Is there an audience for my product, and who do I think it is? And is this something that I can sell and make a business out of and be successful if that's the goal that you have for your product?
And I'm really glad that you do that work, Sarah, obviously, because I think it's one thing to love baking cookies for your friends and family, and like you're always the go-to person who brings them to the fundraisers and all of that. But if once you sit down and run the numbers and realize that, in order to pay the rent and, live off the cookie business, you've got to be baking around the clock. Like that's a huge difference than baking on the weekends for fun.
Yeah. And what we see happen sometimes is, the burnout comes, right? And then the love of cookie making goes away, and then no one gets to enjoy your cookies because you're like, I don't want to see another chocolate chip cookie possibly for the rest of my life, right? You're like, I'm so exhausted.
Exactly. But Sarah, I think that you brought up a good point that I want to circle back on. And this is the idea that once we are in production, whether, you have a packaged food business or you are a restaurant or a caterer, whatever, once you are actually public facing and selling your product, it is important to continue to talk to your audience and figure out what they want. Because I think so often we launch our businesses thinking that we know exactly what we're going to make, who's going to buy it, how it's going to work. And I think if we had, 100 food business owners in this room right now, 100% of them would say that is not how it went down for them.
Yeah.
So I've got another example that highlights this, and this is with a friend of mine, Charlie Birkinshaw, the founder of Element Shrub. So Charlie, I don't know if you know this, Sarah, but Charlie is a Retail Ready alumni, and he has come back to the Retail Ready group as a coach in my community. So it's really fun. He's like helping students through the content based off his producer perspective.
Oh, that's awesome.
All while still running Element Shrub. So like Charlie doesn't sleep. But Charlie had this experience, and he shares it a lot in Retail Ready, so I feel comfortable talking about it on this podcast. But he swore up and down that his shrubs were primarily for cocktails, and that like people were using them in alcoholic drinks. And like Charlie loves cocktails, like he is a fantastic bartender, and he was like, that's, I'm putting the stake in the ground. Like that is how people use my shrubs. Sure enough, he did our target audience and like the survey work through Retail Ready. And he found that something, crazy, like 95% of the people who had purchased his shrubs use them for non-alcoholic beverages.
Wow.
And it was so eye-opening for him because he was then able to make changes to his business based off those survey results that ended up making his content even more relatable to that audience. And obviously it has that like effect of increasing sales in his business. So where he saw it specifically, Sarah, was in his social media, in his Instagram. He was posting like 90% of the pictures were cocktails. And Charlie's a photographer. They're beautiful pictures, but like they're cocktails, right? And once he realized that his audience didn't care about the cocktails, he started making mocktails and, frankly, like just pictures of it in sparkling water. Right. And sure enough, like the engagement took off, the conversions skyrocketed, all because he decided he wasn't going to make that assumption about his audience. And
he started speaking to the people who are actually consuming his product and want to consume his product. Oh, that's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. So we've determined that you may start with a product and you may have an idea of who your target audience is, and that target audience may change as you actually start to sell your product.
Sure.
But so let's say, the business owner, our hypothetical business owner here, has done the work and they're solid on who their target audience is, or at least as best they can be at this point in their process. And they've determined that their audience can handle, is willing to pay for a more expensive product.
Yep.
Maybe it's the first product of its kind on the market, or maybe it's just like higher price than anything else, currently on the shelf. They decide to move forward with the price point. What can they do to ensure their success?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it all goes back to creating a brand and not a product line.
Okay.
And this is really where I see food and beverage founders struggle. Typically sales don't come, reorders don't come, like lines around the block don't happen unless you have created a brand, right? And I think that this is really hard, Sarah. Like I'm a cookie baker. Like I'm not a branding expert. Like I don't know. I make sauerkraut. Like I don't know the first thing about creating a brand. I think about a brand as the personality behind the product. And it's really important to realize that every product is going to have a brand. Almost like every company is going to have a company culture. And you can either mold it and shape it and have it go the way you want, intentionally form that brand, or you can just kind of like see what happens. And I probably can't swear on this podcast, but kind of do it like halfway and have it fizzle a bit, right? Mm-hmm. And so, Sarah, I think it's really important to think about it. Like your brand is your personality. Your brand is the promise that you make to the consumers. It is your values. It is your colors, your fonts. It's what you will do and what you won't do. Like it's your customer service standards. It's all of those things that go into creating your company. So I think what's important to remember here is that when you try to sell a product, it's really easy to stay in this lane of being a product line, right? I sell 3 different types of cookies, and you can get, snickerdoodle, chocolate chip, or whatever, a brownie. Yeah. And that's it. However, what happens when you become this company that is known for these 3 flavors of cookies, and everything that you talk about, everything that you post about, everything that you do in your business revolves around how delicious and amazing your cookies are. It's a subtle difference.
Yeah.
But it's a really important one.
My experience as a buyer before becoming a financial consultant was working with good food businesses. And I knew that, for example, when the catering sales team got on the phone with someone and tried to sell them based on the quality of the product, it didn't work out.
No,
right? They
never.
needed what's the experience going to be? How easy is it going to be? Right? All of the rest. So I think in the good food space, something that I see folks struggle with quite often is differentiating kind of what I do or how we do things.
Yes.
From the bigger picture of brand and brand identity.
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point here, Sarah, that when you try to sell your product based off taste, that's when you lose your audience. Because if you are a food founder who doesn't think your product tastes good, you are in the minority, right? You are in the wrong business. We all think our products are delicious. And taste is subjective, right? McDonald's thinks that their hamburgers are tasty. I might not, right? So when you are selling based on taste alone or ingredient sourcing, we've got the freshest lettuce in our salads. Yeah. We've got the creamiest avocados in our tacos. I'm you and everybody else.
Right.
Right? So I do think, Sarah, it is important to realize that when you put a stake in the ground and all of your messaging is around those subjective things, your audience can't rally behind that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's kind of like you're serving them facts.
Yeah.
Right? But those facts aren't making them have any kind of feeling about
exactly.
your product.
And okay, how wonderful that you source from farms within 50 miles, but what does it mean for me as the consumer? Yeah. And so I think one of the tiny tweaks that I would an assignment that I would give to your listeners, Sarah, is to really look at their content, whether it's on their website, whether it's their social media channels, whether it's literally their menu, their packaging copy, and just note how often you talk about yourself as a brand versus how often you talk about what benefit are you giving to the consumer. And I think that's a really easy way to switch it here, because again, that shopper, that buyer doesn't care, frankly, about you and your values and your sourcing and your deliciousness. Right. What they care about is, how am I going to interact with your brand? What are the benefits that I am going to receive by giving you my money? How am I going to feel when I interact with your brand or your business? I'm not quite sure how to articulate it here, but I think it is important to realize that we are not in the place to determine what our audience should or should not spend on our products.
Okay, I love that.
And I might make almond butter and personally say okay, well, I'm going to have to sell it for $24.99, but who the heck is going to buy my almond butter at $24.99? It's not our job as the business owner to determine what is an appropriate or not appropriate price for our consumer. It's a personal choice. If somebody wants to spend $25 on my almond butter, come and do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that too, because going back to something I said in the beginning is that there's so much emotion and fear and anxiety, right, about setting the price of your product, particularly in the situations where it feels to you too high for someone else to buy. And the reason I brought that up earlier, and I think it goes with the statement that you just made so well, is because like you said, it's not up to us as the business owner, right? The producer of the product to determine what's right for someone else.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, I'll tell you, Sarah, it's something that I've struggled with in my own business, right?
Yeah.
It's like when I'm pricing my services, and maybe you felt it too, I was like, is this fair? Is this right? Is this, standard? And at the end of the day, like, it's not up to me to determine what people are comfortable paying.
And I'll say this to add to this idea, and I'm so happy that you decided to go here. When we are talking about pricing our product, right, we are taking factual information into consideration.
Yeah.
What are the ingredients? What are we packaging? What are the values? What is the end product that we want to serve to people in order to fulfill your dream, right? In order to continue serving people with this product, you have to have a financially successful business. Yes. So there's two things, right, at play here. An actual determined amount that you need to charge for your product in order to be in business. And then this, the willingness to let go of, as you said, determining what someone else is willing to or might be willing to pay for your product.
Yes, absolutely, Sarah. And I think it's so important to have that financial understanding from the beginning, so you don't wake up 3 years into your business and realize that you have just created a very expensive hobby and you're, in the red. I do think, though, along that same line, is that once we determine what we need to charge based off facts, right? Yep. We then have to, again, build that brand that warrants the price that we need to charge.
Absolutely.
And so, I think about it, especially in this good food community, that when we are charging premium prices, the brand has to back it up. So again, Sarah, it's every single touch point that you have with your community, with your audience, that will either positively convey the value of your brand or it's going to miss the mark. And that is really what you've got to focus on once you determine that you are a premium product there.
Yeah. And this is something that I think, again, might be going through the heads of some of the people who are listening. It's like, marketing and this brand strategy and this brand identity. Yeah. Like, can't I just make an amazing product and have it and sell it? And the answer is like no, right? No. Like there has to be it takes work.
Absolutely. And I used this example on a podcast episode a couple of weeks ago, and I said the worst business advice that I've ever heard is, if you build it, they will come. I'm like, that was horrible, right? As a child of the 80s, I grew up like with this in my mind. But it is so naive to think that you can create this wonderful product, create a website, maybe make an Instagram page, and then the sales will start rolling in. It just doesn't happen like that. And it's heartbreaking to watch people have that realization.
And I know that that's part of the reason that you started to do the work that you do now, is because you encountered so many amazing, delicious, well-sourced brands that just didn't have what they needed put together to get their products on the shelves and into people's, shopping carts or baskets or whatever it might be.
Yeah, totally, Sarah. So I'm glad you remember this piece of my brand story, but it's exactly that. When I was a grocery buyer, I would see these brands who had incredible products come knocking on my door only to fail at the follow-up email sequence, only to have a sell sheet that had incomplete information, so I didn't know how to order and receive the product, only to not understand the financials, so they didn't fully comprehend why I had to put my 40% margin on their product line. All of these different things. And it was just, Sarah, it was just heartbreaking to see these business owners who had fantastic products not succeed because they simply didn't have the education on how to make it in wholesale.
Yeah. And we're specifically talking today about, higher priced or high priced products, because this episode is actually one in a series of episodes centered around pricing. And so I really wanted to kind of focus in on that here. But what you're telling us and sort of teaching us today about brand and brand strategy and how we talk to our audience is important no matter where you are and no matter who your target audience is. Even if you're a lower priced product, this still pertains to you.
Absolutely, Sarah. And I'm glad that you bring this up. And I think it is funny that our conversation has centered around a brand when, I'm going to be clear, like I'm not a branding agent or I don't have a branding agency. Like I'm not a packaging designer. Like that is not what I do for my brand, for my Retail Ready students.
Yeah.
But the core piece of Retail Ready is how to speak the language of wholesale, how to get on grocery store shelves, how to get into shoppers' baskets once you get on those shelves. And we can't do that. We can't be successful in that until we build a brand that consumers, people, and wholesale buyers want, right? So Sarah, I'll tell you, like my students come in and they want to skip to the brains of the buyer module. They want to make their sell sheet. Like they want to practice their pitch with me. And I'm like, no. Like we got to go back to like the brand foundations first.
Yeah. I love that. It takes, I just call, what do I say in some of my materials? It's like, you got to do the work. We're doing the work, and it's hard because it's new to us, or for me, I just despise doing things I'm not good at and that I don't have all the answers for. Right? Yep. Okay. Yeah.
Me too.
But it's like, but that sort of is the signal that we need to really sit down and focus on those things and get help from people like yourself, to dial it in and to dig through and to figure it out. And to go back to something you said earlier, you might not get it exactly right in the beginning, right? But you're going to come to a conclusion. You're going to, have a good idea, the best that you can get about your audience, and work with that. And when it's almost like that Maya Angelou saying, which is constantly on repeat in my head, when you know better, you do better. Right. And it's all a part of a process.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a process. I know this as a business owner. I know you know this too, Sarah. Like we are constantly learning and evolving. And gosh, if I could track all of the things that I have tried, failed at, tried again, modified over the past 7 years of having my business, it would fill a whole wall.
Yeah. So I want to just touch on one more thing. You brought up this idea of touch points and the importance of conveying sort of the value of your brand through these various touch points. Can you give the listeners some examples of what those touch points would be? Because my hunch is it's not just Instagram and your website, right? There's a lot more, and there's many more touch points that people might not be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you are right, Sarah, that it is your social media channels and your website and your online digital presence, especially if you are primarily direct to consumer, right? But I think it's important to realize that there are touch points in every stage of that consumer's journey, right? So it is deciding where you're going to sell. Maybe more importantly, where you're not going to sell, right? Like I am going to sell at Berkeley Bowl, but I will not sell in Walmart, right?
Right.
That's a touch point for your shoppers. It is figuring out like that experience that the wholesale buyer has with your brand. If we're talking about packaged food and beverage, right? So it is, what does your sell sheet look like? What does your price list look like? What does your sales pipeline look like? Do you have photography in your email footer, right? It is every tiny interaction that you have trying to get your product on shelf. from a consumer level, Sarah, we talked about social media, website, but it's also, what is your packaging look like? What does it look like on the retail shelf? What does it look like if I order it online? Like, I always think about the unboxing experience that is so 2020, right? So 2019, so 2020. So it's like so much of this time where we create these brands that provide an experience for the person purchasing the brand from start to finish. Yeah. I think that idea of that like unboxing is just really, really clear on where we are with brands nowadays.
Yeah.
So
I'll share a quick story. I have a jam that I've been in love with since I owned my food business back in 2010. And, I still buy her jam regularly. And I noticed when going forward in the fridge the other day, on the side, it said made by Margaret and had the date that she made it on. And I was just like, I have fallen in love all over again. Like, just when I thought there was nothing that could win me over, like on another level, for me, that did it. And I was like, this is just so amazing.
10 years later. I love that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's all of those tiny little touch points that we don't think about, but collectively they create your brand, right? Yeah. It is that like the sum of all parts come together to create a really powerful brand. I love thinking about this stuff because when we see businesses that have slow sales or that just aren't quite like hitting it, aren't quite gaining that traction that they want, it's almost always a branding and marketing challenge.
Yeah.
Not a pricing challenge.
It's interesting. What just popped into my head too is sometimes when we see slow sales, like you just mentioned, there's this tendency to discount, to have a sale, to offer some incentive to get people in. And I will say it here, and you're going to hear me say it many more times. I'm not a fan of the discount. I'm not a fan of drawing people in and giving away the little margin that you have in your business to gain someone who may only be purchasing your product based on that financial incentive.
Right. You're training your audience to wait for a discount. Yeah. And so, Sarah, I think that there are strategic times to do a discount, right? Yeah. Like if you are getting into Kroger and they want you to do a placement deal and they're like, we're either going to put you on our shelves or not, depending on whether or not you can offer this discount. Sure. Yeah. Do a discount, right? Like that, when you're at that level, you are playing a different game. Yeah. Sure. But like, do you need to do $1 off your jam every Saturday at the farmer's market just to like draw people into your booth? No. Yeah.
Oh, so much good information. I feel like we could literally talk for hours on the topic, but I will spare you. I'll invite you back for another episode. But before we officially wrap up, is there anything else, any kind of closing thoughts or final thoughts that you want to share with the listeners before we sign off?
Yeah, Sarah, well, thank you so much for having me. I agree. Like you and I could talk for hours and hours. And I just want to reiterate that the food businesses who do struggle are the ones who haven't put in the effort to build a brand, right? They're stuck in this place of trying to sell a product and they haven't done that branding work. I mean, it is a ton of work, Sarah, but it is one of the key foundations to building a sustainable business. And it's never too late to go back and do that work.
Awesome. So true. So for those CPG brands that are listening who somehow aren't aware of you, your Instagram or your Retail Ready course, can you tell them where they can find you and learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. So you can find me on foodbizwiz.com or on Instagram at It's Alli Ball, or on my weekly podcast. Sarah, you're going to be on an episode there soon, and I'm so excited for it. We have podcasts that come out every single Thursday at foodbizwiz.com, and then of course on all the podcast players.
Yes, amazing. And thank you. It was my pleasure to have you here today. And of course we will link to all of Alli's contact points in the show notes. And just one more reminder, if you are a business owner who has, listened to this episode and you have decided, I based on my target market, I've got to lower my price a little bit, join us on the YouTube channel. There's a short video there to give you some inspiration for lowering your costs without compromising quality and value. And then you can also join us inside the Profitable Food Business group on Mighty Network. There's a link in the show notes for that as well. We do a live Q&A every month, and I'm happy to answer your questions on that there. I think that does it. So great to have you. We'll talk to you all again very soon.
Thanks, Sarah. Bye.
Bye-bye.